Max was the grumpiest dog anyone had ever met, and he liked his quiet life. Until one day 2 mischievous bobcats showed up and nothing would ever be the same again. Max was the grumpiest dog anyone had ever met, and he liked his quiet life until one day 2 mischievous bobcats showed up and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning had been ordinary, with the sun casting golden streaks across the yard and the farm. Smelling of hay and damp earth, Max had settled in his favorite spot, near the barn, watching the chickens pecking lazily and the wind rustling through the trees when he first noticed movement at the edge of the woods. 2 shapes crouched low, eyes glinting like tiny amber lanterns, and Max felt a twinge of unease ripple through him. He growled low in his throat, a warning that was more habit than threat, but the creatures did not flinch. They tilted their heads in a way that suggested amusement, as if they were already planning something, and Max stiffened, his paws digging into the soft dirt below him. The bobcats moved with a grace that made him uneasy, their muscles flowing beneath their fur like liquid shadow, and when they stepped closer, he felt the old thrill of tension curl through his body. This was new, this was unpredictable, and it made the air taste different, sharp with possibility. The bobcats approached carefully, curious noses twitching, and Max barked and lunged forward, not to hurt them, but to establish boundaries. They paused and watched his reaction, as though waiting for the moment to test him again, and then in a sudden burst of movement, they darted to the side and disappeared behind the tall grass. Max snapped his jaws after them and raced forward, paws thudding against the earth, but they had already vanished, leaving only rustling leaves in his own impatient growls. Max had faced other intrusions in his life, wild animals and strangers alike, but these were different. They were clever, patient, and relentless, and Max felt the first hint of a challenge he had not sought but could not ignore. The farmers discovered the bobcats days later, abandoned and orphaned. They decided to bring them to the farm for care and locksome. Max was forced into the presence of creatures whose energy rivaled a storm. They followed him everywhere, prowling quietly, just out of reach, and when he tried to retreat to his corners or sleep in the sun, they would appear suddenly, pouncing on shadows or rolling across the floor just at the edge of his reach. They were relentless, clever, and surprisingly bold. Max barked and growled and at times snapped out of frustration, but the bobcats were always ready, anticipating his moves and circling back to test him again and again. Every moment of his day became a game of wits, with small acts of chaos scattered throughout his routine. They would hide his food under hay bales, drag small objects across the yard, and even sneak into the barn when he was patrolling the perimeter. And Max realized that his once predictable life was now a string of tiny crises, orchestrated by creatures who seemed to understand him better than he understood himself. At night, he would lie awake, ears twitching, listening to the soft padding of their paws across the wooden floor, the whisper of fur brushing against hay, and the quiet hum of their breathing in the dark. The bobcats were fearless, moving in ways that seemed impossible, yet somehow gentle and vulnerable at the same time, and Max felt a strange tug of responsibility that clashed with his natural grumpiness. He was the guardian in their world, and yet he could not quite assert the dominance he once relied upon. Every attempt to corral them or teach them boundaries was met with unexpected cleverness. They seemed to study him with eyes that reflected the moonlight, and in those glimmering orbs, Max began to sense intelligence, patience, and mischief intertwined in ways he had never encountered before. The days blended into each other, with small explosions of chaos and moments of tense calm. Max chased them across the yard, through tall grasses and over fences, and each time, they slipped away, leaving him to bark and growl at shadows. The bobcats were like 2 living riddles, moving at the edge of comprehension, testing limits and patience, and every morning he awoke with the quiet dread of anticipating the next act of playful rebellion. Sometimes they would leap silently onto his back, startling him into barking and running, only to vanish as if they had never been there. Other times they would drag the farmer's belongings into the yard, leaving Max to face the confusion and scolding that followed. Their cleverness was unnerving, their persistence exhausting, and Max found himself simultaneously irritated and fascinated by their antics. The first time Max realized he was losing the game was when they cornered him in the barn. One bobcat leaped from the rafters and the other darted between hay bales, and Max found himself trapped in the center, pacing in frustration, unable to assert control. He lunged carefully, timing each movement with precision, learning that brute force was not enough, and yet every instinct screamed at him to growl and bite and chase. He felt alive. In that moment, the rush of tension curling through his body, and the strange thrill of uncertainty that came from facing creatures who were smarter and faster than he expected. The bobcats hissed and circled, eyes glinting like tiny stars in the darkness, and Max realized that their games were not random but deliberate lessons, teaching him patience, focus, and cunning, whether he wanted it or not. Over time, he began to notice their patterns, the subtle shifts in their movements, the ways they manipulated objects to provoke him, and the almost imperceptible signals they gave one another, as if plotting silently. He found himself anticipating their tricks before they occurred, sometimes succeeding in intercepting them, and other times being outmaneuvered entirely. Every success was a small victory, every failure a lesson, and slowly he began to feel a grudging respect for their cleverness. Max had always been grumpy, he had always preferred solitude, yet now he was entangled in a constant dance with these creatures who had forced their way into his life and his heart. The chaos they brought was exhausting but exhilarating, the mischief a challenge he could not refuse, and every night as he lay in the barn, curled near the warmth of the bobcats, he felt a strange mixture of irritation and affection. Max could not yet admit to himself that he had begun to care. The bobcats were relentless and mischievous and completely unpredictable, and yet in their energy and cunning, he saw glimpses of something familiar, something that resonated with the wild part of him he had long ignored. They had turned his life into a puzzle, a daily test of patience and ingenuity, and every morning he woke with anticipation, dreading, and longing for the next encounter. He realized that this would be his new existence, a balance of grumpiness and reluctant guardianship, and in the quiet moments, when they slept at his feet, he felt the first flicker of acceptance that his life had irrevocably changed and that he would never again experience the calm predictability he had once cherished. Max had grown used to the bobcats in a way that was both frustrating and unavoidable. He had learned to anticipate their tricks to some extent, yet every day they found new ways to test him, new ways to invade his patience, and poke at the edges of his grumpiness. The farm had become a stage for their endless games, and Max's life was no longer quiet, but alive with constant motion. Their small bodies darted across the yard in the early morning light, pouncing from shadows and climbing structures with impossible grace, while Max raced after them, paws pounding against the dirt, his old muscles stretching and straining to keep up. He would bark and growl and sometimes snap, yet even when he caught them they would twist and roll, slipping free from his grasp, leaving him panting and bewildered, and the bobcats would gaze at him with those clever amber eyes as if laughing silently at his expense. One evening, a storm rolled over the farm, black clouds swallowing the sky, and thunder rumbling through the valley. Max sensed danger before anyone else. The bobcats were restless, hiding beneath the barn rafters and darting between corners, trying to avoid the sudden downpour, but the wind howled and the rain began to fall, and then a flash of lightning struck an old tree near the edge of the yard, sending it crashing to the ground, blocking the main path. Max ran toward the bobcats, calling and growling, but they were trapped on the far side, and the water began to rise quickly in the ditch below. The bobcats mewed in alarm, their small bodies shaking, and Max's heart pounded in a way that left no room for grumpiness. The instinct to protect them surged like fire through his veins. He leaped and ran, balancing carefully along the slick ground, snatching one bobcat under his jaws, and then returning for the other, maneuvering through the storm with a combination of strength and care that he had not known he possessed. The wind tore at his fur, and rain filled his eyes, yet nothing mattered except getting them to safety once the bobcats were safely inside the barn. Max shook water from his coat and looked at them in the dim light. Their fur was wet and matted, and their small chests rose and fell rapidly, yet they were unharmed. They looked at him with quiet trust, and for the first time Max felt a warmth in his chest that went beyond relief or pride. He had saved them, they had survived, and in that moment the dynamic shifted subtly yet profoundly. Max was no longer just their reluctant companion. He was their protector, their anchor, and the bobcats seemed to recognize it, curling close to him in the straw. Settling into the space he allowed them, Max growled softly, not from irritation but from an unfamiliar sense of contentment, mixed with lingering wariness.